Sometimes you just gotta kick back, relax, and become the vampire overlord of a puny human kingdom. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel.
Our hunt begins again.
Hello everyone, whether you enjoy my coverage of turn-based strategy RPGs, regular RPGs, or the gaming sphere in general, including more out-there off-topic things that are still pretty interesting, like V Rising, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. Also, thank you to Stunlock Studios for offering to let me check out both versions of V Rising, the original PC release and the brand new PS5 release, which was launched just a few days ago by the time you're seeing this video, including the new Legacy of Castlevania DLC. Stunlock very kindly sponsored this video as they wanted to know my thoughts on the game as a brand new player and how I felt about the game on PC with mouse and keyboard versus on PS5 with controller. I also decided to take it a step further and spend some time playing multiplayer with my buddy Eric, who has played the game before, unlike myself, to get that angle as well. Today, we're discussing graphics, vibe, game feel, controls, and everything else that Stunlock put into making what is really a very, very cool vampire survival game. I've spent about 3 hours now with both versions of the game on Steam and on PS5, going through the beginning areas, fighting the first few bosses, and getting a hang for the crafting, base building, and combat that V Rising has to offer. I started on Steam as the quote-unquote original release location of the game, the version that I had been keeping an eye on for a good year or two, but had never quite gotten around to picking up for myself, and I gotta say, I was immediately very impressed with it. I don't know what exactly I was expecting going into it, other than having heard from a lot of people that it is a very good game, and I have to agree with that. But the interesting blending of sort of MMO-style ability cooldowns, or maybe more action RPG is a better way to look at it, survival crafting, Minecraft, Terraria type vibe, with the overall dark gothic setting of anything to do with vampire fiction, definitely speaks to me. Those are all some of my favorite types of things in the genres that they exist in. I know we don't really talk about it a lot here on the channel, but I do love vampire fiction. Vampires are super awesome and super badass, so being able to play one here and rebuild a kingdom is super fun. And the way that you can go about doing that, fighting monsters, gathering resources, actually having some pretty intense timing in terms of counters and dodges and counterattacks, especially when you get to Brutal, which we'll talk about in a second, really made for a very compelling gameplay experience that I was immediately drawn into. Once I switched over to the PS5 version of the game, it was clear that there was as much care put into that version of the release as there was into the original release on Steam. I've played a lot of games where it comes out originally on PC and then it gets ported to consoles and it just doesn't feel right. You can tell that it was built for a different environment, a different screen setup, or a different control scheme with mouse and keyboard, and things just don't translate well. But I was very impressed and very surprised with how good it felt playing V Rising on PS5, how it felt to play on a controller, given how many different abilities and context-sensitive actions there are that you need to be able to navigate on the much smaller control scheme of a controller. It was translated very well. With how good the game felt to play on controller, I have very little doubt that anyone who chooses to pick this up on PS5 will have just as enjoyable of an experience there as I did with my initial run on Steam. I was worried at first, again, because there are so many different actions that you can take, and it took a little bit of adjustment since I had already gotten used to the mouse and keyboard controls when I switched to PS5, but it did not take long for me to be dodging around attacks, successfully countering, pulling up different weapons to use in different situations, throwing magic, and then going over to my base and gathering wood and stone, putting things into resource refinement buildings, putting up new walls, chests, my coffin, etc. I didn't really run into frustrating issues with being able to navigate menus that would normally just be a kind of point-and-click scenario when you're on mouse and keyboard. And there is a lot of menuing to do in this game, so that's a pretty impressive feat. Really, the biggest point at which I was concerned that switching from mouse and keyboard to controller would cause problems for me was in more intense boss fights, such as here when I accidentally ran into a V-Blood carrier that was far higher level than me and that I had not been intending to fight. It surpassed like the first 4 bosses that I was supposed to go after. But I decided, you know what, I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna see if I can pull this off. And granted, I was not on Brutal, but I did manage it, and being on controller wasn't something that caused any problems for me. So as probably the single most intense encounter that I've had in the game thus far, that tells me everything that I need to know about not having the finesse that you would need on a controller to achieve what you need to in V-Rising on PS5. Like really, you can see how quick and responsive it is when you're trying to target your attacks in this comparison here between PC and on PS5. Like there's really no major difference here whatsoever. You are able to stay on your feet, light and dodgy, just as you need to be a conquering, blood-sucking vampire. Really, it's clear that Stunlock put a lot of time during their early access period into making V-Rising the best experience that they could. And it's a very stellar example of why early access can be so good. It gives you the opportunity to work with your fans, work with your community, and make something that actually lives up to not only what you want it to be as the developer, but what the people who are playing it and dedicating that early time and money to it want it to be as well. It's a delicate balance. A lot of games don't get it right, but it seems like V-Rising and Stunlock definitely did. As far as the overall design, vibe, game feel of V-Rising as a whole, I love it. It really nails that idea of you are a stalking vampire making your way through forests and other desolate locales, hunting people and animals to get the blood that you need to survive, while slowly building up your power base and working to take over this region and any other regions that you wind up coming across. It doesn't take very long before you start building up a castle on top of a tall mountain or nestled away in what used to be a tranquil forest grove that now is going to be your center of darkness. Like, it's really easy to get that going, and it immediately gives you that feeling of, oh, I'm going to be a powerhouse in this area, especially then once you unlock the ability to start tracking bosses, going through those fights, draining their power to build your own, getting new spells. Like, it's really, really easy to get into, and maybe it's just because I do have a wealth of experience with MMOs and action RPGs that it just felt familiar to me, but it's very accessible, very approachable, so much so that my girlfriend Jane, who really doesn't play those types of games at all, was watching over my shoulder and said that she immediately wanted to play as well, just from watching me and hearing me describe what I was doing. So that's a pretty good mark of endorsement right there. As I mentioned, I did also put some time into the game with my buddy Eric, who also had played the game previously, so he was able to give me a little bit of guidance as we got into the further sections of the game that I had not yet experienced for myself, which is great because we decided, like the lunatics that we are, that we were going to play on Brutal. Me with my cumulative 6 hours of gameplay through the very early stages of the game, and he with a relatively low amount of play time in the early access period. We're like, nah, we're gamers, we can handle this. We could not handle it. We did actually. We made a very good showing of it. You can see some of the footage here, but it was, it got pretty nasty. Some of the mechanics that bosses brought out, the amount of HP that they had, the amount of damage that they could do, some poorly timed forays where we wound up in the middle of boss fights when the sun came out and we started burning alive or burning on death, burning as undead. You know what I mean. It got really hairy, but it made for a very, very enjoyable experience. I almost started to feel like I was playing an action RPG Souls-like, with the timing of my counters and my dodges, knowing when to go in to attack, when to fall back and throw magic, making sure I was maximizing my cooldown usage were all vital parts of clearing any of these fights. And this is early game stuff. I can only imagine what it'll be like in later levels and with harder bosses. And going through that with a partner in co-op was so much fun. I know that you can have very large groups of people on servers, including potentially even competing clans, do some roleplay stuff. That all sounds awesome. A little bit beyond the scope of what I had the opportunity to mess around with for myself, but I want to check it out because it sounds like it's going to be a great time. It's always nice to see when a game comes along like V-Rising that takes the time to craft an extremely enjoyable and immersive multiplayer experience. I think of things like Project Zomboid that are so fun to go through with friends and experience that world and try to survive with each other. And I was getting the same type of feeling from V-Rising, which is absolutely awesome. Graphically, I could notice basically no difference between the Steam and PS5 versions. I'll have some footage on screen side by side, labeled which one's PS5 and which one is Steam, and they both looked great. You know, I've got a good gaming PC. I can run pretty much whatever I want at max settings, and the PS5 held up in pretty much every category that I could see. If you're worried about having a poorer graphical experience compared to playing on PC, I don't think you have to worry about that at all. The game looked great, and it ran great. I didn't have any stuttering issues, no weird frame rate problems, loading things. It was smooth as butter. So whether you want to pick this up on PC or on PS5, I highly encourage you to do so. All told, I loved my time with V Rising. I'm absolutely going to be playing more of it with Eric on my own, maybe with Jane if she decides to pick it up. And if it's something that you guys would enjoy seeing more of on the channel, do let me know that as well. It's a lot of fun, and I could even potentially see there being room for a community server or something along those lines. So drop it in the comments. Let me know what your thoughts are on that, because this one definitely has legs, and I can see why everyone was singing its praises during the early access period, and should be even more so now that it's out and its 1.0 release and is coming to PS5 as well, or actually has already come to PS5 by the time you're seeing this. Thank you once again to Stunlock for giving me this opportunity, for sponsoring this video. You've made a wonderful product here, and I will absolutely be keeping my eyes on whatever it is that you do with it or future projects going forward. With that said, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.